This is Cassandra Harris Lockwood, and this is the hot seat.
Okay, wait. All right, everybody's hot now. Okay, we're all hot.
We are all hot.
We're back.
And we are back. I'm getting this producer thing down.
I wouldn't call myself hot exactly.
Ow! Let me do the gin of that, John. Baby Wayne's in the house, all right.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a good Thursday. Really, it really
that
is.
Juneteenth.
Yes. Happy Juneteenth,
This is
everybody.
like the
Just a
old,
reminder.
the old zoo crew and what was the station.
How was it there?
It was nice.
Oh, yeah,
Good.
that's right.
Except it's at 5 p.m., not in the morning.
You gotta have those sound of, what are those things called? Whatever.
So, John, how long have you been in media?
I have been in
I love
media.
some
I
media.
can say
I can ask you.
1978, so I'm coming up on
Longer than me.
my golden anniversary in the media.
Wow.
1978, John?
Yeah.
78.
And just for the listeners, John Stemen has been with Phoenix Radio for several years now, and he's an accomplished journalist. You're going to learn a lot about his history the next 2 sessions.
Yeah.
And I'm all ears. I remember seeing you, I think it was Dancy.
Mm.
You're working with Dancy, and I interviewed him briefly. That was about 5-6 years ago.
At least, yeah.
Yeah, at least 5 or 6. It seems like yesterday. I have
Those
temporal
guys-
issues now the older I get. This is weird. But, yeah.
Well,
So-
John, why don't you take us
Break it
back
down.
in time? How did it all begin? You grew up and you wanted to be on the radio. I read.
From a
and here
very
you
young
are.
age, yeah.
So that's what you wanted to do when you were a kid,
Yeah.
right?
So I was born in 1961 in historic Gettysburg,
Oh,
Pennsylvania.
cool.
And back then it was really a sleepy small town. And from about I remember from the age of 3, my parents had this giant, one of these old Magnavox radios with a speaker that would blow anything out of the water today. And it could pick up like every AM station you could imagine at night, like.
There was so much more.
And there was a lot of diversity on the radio, and so I would listen to these out-of-town stations, and I decided that was what I was going to do. And my parents' attitude, I think, was like, "Yeah, right." But I never really lost that radio bug.
Did you want to do news or be a DJ?
Was
Or both?
it specifically radio, or were you just media in general? Did it have to be radio?
Mostly radio, and
Of course, back then, all there was newspaper, radio,
Yeah.
TV. So
never too interested in TV for some reason, but radio and to
We
some
have
degree
basically radio.
newspapers.
Let's be honest.
And the opportunity would present itself.
yeah.
Sooner than I expected. I worked in political campaigns from probably about the time I was maybe 14 or 15,
Mm-hmm.
and got to know some of the political personalities. And there was a guy running for the state house. And Gettysburg has always been impossibly Republican, but there was a guy that won by 1 vote. He won a state house seat by 1 vote that I worked for, a Democrat, and they actually did a movie about it called,
Really?
1 Vote Counts.
What was
I believe
the
it was
name?
called. Kenneth Cole, and unfortunately our
I've heard
area,
the designer named that.
Yeah.
But it's my favorite designer.
our area became more,
Politician.
down there became more Republican,
Yeah.
and he eventually lost by a very narrow margin. And I don't believe there's anyone who's a Democrat besides, I think they have like a county commission where the Democrat is guaranteed 1 of the 3 seats,
That's like
and that's about
Sounds
it
like
right
Westmoreland.
now.
Pennsylvania is one of the few purple states that we have.
So did that give you like an entree into media? Like, did you talk to reporters doing that, or?
Well, there weren't too many reporters around Gettysburg, but you sort of knew the newspaper reporters there. They were kind of, there was a guy named Ross Raymer that always ran around taking pictures, and I got to know him, and he was a great character. He wouldn't last very long in the workplace today because he was kind of
Not
a little bit
politically correct.
inappropriate, and but I thought I want to be like him. I want to be one of those guys. But what happened is I decided I'd go the route when I was a junior in high school of going to radio stations and just getting like a part-time DJ gig. And as it happened, my English teacher had a son that worked at the big top 40 station. It was sort of like, the WNYZ was here years ago. And they needed help in the newsroom, so I worked for free for a while, just running around and using a phone booth and calling in stories from here and there that the news guy would use.
Like sit down on a pad and then go pick up the phone and like just like you see in the movies.
Yeah, and it just so happened that not too much later they decided they could use another news anchor, and so I had already been doing reporting, and it was fairly easy to transition into being the afternoon news guy. So I would rush off from school every day about 2:30 and drive 15 miles to the station.
What a cool after school job.
Yeah, and do the the afternoon news. And
wow. So like what was involved in anchoring the afternoon news on the radio? This would be back in like the early 70s?
This was later
Or mid-70s,
70s,
or?
79, 80.
Okay, because you'd be like getting done with high school. So you'd be about like
I was
17.
still in high school
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
that, yeah.
So like what was involved in that? In the anchoring the news, or like actually what was involved in producing a news segment back then?
It wasn't really, I wasn't really the best newsman. I mean, back in those days, there was an FCC requirement that there be news, so they had to
Really?
do some news. So I tended to rely a lot on the wire, and then maybe occasionally doing an interview like about some police beat incident or something like that. But I didn't really have time to go running around doing stories. I was
Right,
in-house a lot of the time. But
Oh, I see. So you're creating like stuff off the wire and
Yeah.
like writing it into your copy.
and doing what they would call actualities in those days, which were sort of little clips of people that you interviewed on the phone, and they had this giant reel-to-reel.
So you would do stuff you do phone interviews.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Kind of like
use-
how nowadays you might do a Zoom interview for that.
yeah, and so
And you could record it. And
you
use
could
audio
record it
from that to-
off the phone,
Yeah.
but there wasn't much time. Now, if I had not been in high school, I probably would have been going to night meetings and stuff like that,
Right,
and doing
right.
stuff for the morning newsman. But
Yeah.
since I was 17 and going to high school,
Oh,
that was
yeah.
just not possible.
Must have been exciting though.
Yeah, I mean, there was sort of an ego thing to it. I mean, this was like a big top 40 FM station that all
Yeah, so
the
it's
kids
cool.
listened
Yeah.
to, and so yeah, it was cool, and I sort of would interact a lot with the afternoon DJ.
Uh-huh.
Sort of, it was probably pretty bad humor. Also, probably kind of wouldn't fit in today very well, but
yeah.
you
It
know,
must have been fun.
I was a personality. Then the AM
Yeah.
station was typical of small town AMs in those days. Farm reports, lots
Oh,
of
right,
weather,
right.
just and there was a morning man on that AM that had one of the best radio voices ever. He was incredible, and he'd been there for years, but he was sort of a local eccentric, and he never left that station. He was there from the early 50s till he passed away in the 80s. I think he was still doing the show in the 70s.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I guess it keeps you young,
And he would do a weather report every morning at like 6:05 that half the town listened to, where he'd go out and walk for 15 minutes, and he'd say, there was a light zephyr in the air as I walked this morning. It was like nothing you can imagine today on the radio, but there was a hanger-on that used to say, when he'd read those school menus, you could smell that chili, the way that he would describe it.
Yeah. Oh, I love old news people like that.
Chili con carne.
Yeah.
So, it was only about a year or so in my life, but it's kind of, you never forget it. And I have stayed in touch with some of those folks. And unfortunately, since they were all older than me, some of them have passed on, but some of them are still on radio today.
Nice. So did you transition to like reporting to like newspapers after that, or how long did you stay with that?
I was terminated from the station the summer of 1980 because they knew I was 2 months away from leaving for college, and they had found this guy that had worked there years ago that I think they always regretted firing, and he turned out to be, he was really a good radio newsman. I mean, I didn't feel, bitter about it. They had to do what they did, and they brought him on.
Tough,
And then there was a family friend running the Gettysburg newspaper, and the day I knew I had 2 weeks left, I called him, and he said, we have room for a reporter right now,
Cool.
but you have to start in 2 days. We can't wait 2 weeks.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
So I had to.
What paper was that?
This was the Gettysburg Times, which
Okay.
to this day is still pretty much the paper it was back
Really?
then. It's not one of
Really?
those that went to a chain.
Now they
and
can.
doesn't cover their area. It still covers
Nice.
their area nicely, I think. And
Yeah, look at
I think it was a little better back in those days, but I look at it now and again, and they're still doing a pretty good job. But somebody's started sort of a rival free publication that people
Oh.
can, people that don't have the means to subscribe can
Yeah,
go to, and,
yeah.
which I think is a good idea.
It is, yeah. So now, was it a big difference? I mean, obviously, to go from radio to newspaper, you're going from audio to actually like text, like printed text, and like you have to think. I would imagine more in terms of like the actual words you're going to use. So how was that? What was it like for you to transition?
Well, in 2 days,
Well, like, transition from like
The question
radio
is hilarious,
to.
man. There was, I got to tell
Yeah,
you.
I
that
don't
was-
mean that like in the modern political
did
sense, but
did you think of that, Ron, before you asked? I'm just wondering.
We're being
Exact
very
question
current
was
here.
just hilarious.
We're trying to get
Before
the
you
younger
write,
demographic.
before you write, do the words come to your mind?
So like you're transitioning from like sound to letters and words.
Hilarious.
So and you're very young too. Like it's a big difference. But also I would think too, like part of radio, like you are a personality, your voice and stuff. With newspaper, like it's not so much so you. You know what I mean? And how did you adjust to that?
it was kind of an adjustment at first, because when you're writing for the ear, you're writing very short, very short stories. I mean, you're doing
Yeah.
a 30-second story about an accident. When you're writing for a small town paper, it is all the news that fits to print.
Right.
Basically, you got to fill a newspaper mostly with local coverage. So,
Right.
So you have to go.
And it has
get-
to be some people will be interested in like not in the moment.
Right.
Although back then newspapers weren't a deal. Right? I guess I was thinking
Everybody got that paper in those days. Now, I would think that the circulation of a small town paper is probably just 20% of the people that live there, or something like that.
Yeah.
But then it was like something that
Like everybody had to. It was Facebook back then.
And if you were in high school, being a newspaper carrier was a good job and all.
Yeah.
Well, I
this
remember
kids-
those days.
Now,
Yeah.
most papers are just mailing.
Yeah,
I don't think they even.
No, newspapers are actually dying. They're not. They don't even deliver papers.
What so did you like? What do you prefer back then? Writing your stories out, or like doing the stories on the air, like saying your stories? What
There
did
was
you
a
like?
lot more. Well, there's a lot of camaraderie in a small town newspaper. I mean, it's young people. They're not making very much money. They're doing what they really want to do, and
Yeah.
I guess what sticks with me
More
is
so than radio.
yeah, I think so. And I mean, what sticks with me is how one morning I got a call at 3 in the morning from my editor, and there had been a double homicide the night before, and he said, we've got to get all hands on deck and put out a special edition.
Yeah.
You've got to get in
It must be
immediately.
exciting.
And there was one guy that you couldn't wake him up, so somebody had to literally break into his apartment to wake him up and get him in. And
Yeah.
but it's like, my job was to run to the state police, get the releases, get some pictures of the suspects, that kind of stuff. And
Yeah,
we all
yeah.
worked together, and
Like
by
a team
noon we had this
spirit.
paper that everybody in town,
Was waiting for
was
him.
waiting for, and it was kind of a bizarre case, because it was this guy that was a couple years ahead of me in high school, and he had it may have been a boyfriend, but there was like a guy about 20 years older, and they were kind of spending a lot of time together, and they were immediately accused of this, but the whole story didn't really fit. And maybe about 10 or 15 years ago, the guys, by the way, were acquitted, but 10 or 15 years ago there was an arrest, and it turns out that the guy's girlfriend, or the guy's sister, had a boyfriend that she had dumped, and he was very jealous. So it was actually this guy, came on the property and killed 2 family members. It was not the guy that went to high school a few years ahead of me. But so it was kind of one of these cases
did you
that
get to
dragged
do
on.
some of the reporting for that?
Yeah, of course, by the time the trial was taking place, I was, back in college again.
Yeah, yeah.
But you know, I contributed. I mean, there was this big byline up front, the following people have contributed, and if you're 17, it's kind of a head rush that you
I
were
would
one of the
say.
people that contributed this special edition.
Yeah, yeah.
But 364 days a year, you were, you know, you were doing kind of everyday stuff.
Right.
Township meetings about sewer projects and a lot of stuff about civic organizations.
Right.
And
What did
know,
you study in college?
I took political science in college because I thought it would, you know, I thought I was already getting journalism experience.
Right.
So why not take something that's going to add to,
Yeah.
you know, reporting?
I've often wondered myself, like if I should have taken a journalism course or some journalism stuff.
I took journalism from
You did?
from high school all through college.
Really? Wow.
Absolutely. I
Wow.
took it every semester.
What was the most
It's weird
valuable
because
things
I
that you
didn't
learned from
expect
that?
to ever use it, you know.
And now you
It
are.
was kind of cool. The years down the road to walk in here and yeah, you want to sweep the floor? Sure. You know how to write? Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah. No, really. Do you know how to write? I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
And little did she know I did. You know.
Yeah.
And it's because of the journalism courses I learned how to write in the newspaper style.
Yep.
You
right,
know, and
right.
And
And
again,
after that, it was just
again,
a-
people are saying bring everyone on camera, but this is just a Facebook with a
Well,
small phone.
it
and
will
we
be
are
on
gonna
camera over here,
everything's
so,
being filmed, and it's going to be on
It's right over there. so-
Utica Phoenix
Yeah, well,
website
what
eventually.
I'll put a link to it on the page for meeting money, so it's easier for
Yeah.
you to find, you know.
All right.
Dave, I'll put it on your Facebook page and you know,
Right.
Dave show of course. but
Yeah, I'm
I'll
always
put it on
I'm
the
always
page.
live.
Yeah.
I go live all the time.
So now, how long did you continue with
Oh,
news?
hold your
papers?
thought, Ron.
Oh, we must be
gotta
ready
go
for
to
commercial.
So we'll be right back.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Cassandra Harris Lockwood, and this is the Hot Seat.
All right, welcome back, everybody. This is the last segment on this June 19th edition of
Juneteenth.
the Hot Seat. And we got Ron Klopfanstein
Hey,
and John
everyone.
Stemen here joining me on what's usually News Roundup Thursday. A little bit special. We want to find out more about John.
Yeah.
So, John,
So tell us about
let
this
us
Palm
know, John.
Beach newspaper that you worked at.
John, have you ever been in danger as a reporter?
Oh yeah, yeah.
a little bit.
Okay,
So
tell us.
I'll try to get into this
Tell us.
portion, but I wound up going down to South Florida to a place called Okeechobee,
Oh,
which is
wow.
kind of, it's about 70 miles west of West Palm Beach, right on Lake Okeechobee. Very rural, and well, you have to watch your step. At
There's
least
a lot
back
of
in
true
those
crime
days you do.
based
I know. I was
Yeah.
thinking that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a lot of true
This-
crime
The
stuff.
swamps and.
Yeah. No, I watch true crime
I can
videos all the
imagine,
time.
yeah.
There's always stuff that's going on down
I was
there.
gonna say.
Yeah, for real. Like,
But he wasn't.
go down that rabbit hole, folks.
Oh, yeah,
For real.
yeah.
You'll get stuck.
Being a reporter down there, you know.
Yeah, break
So
it down.
I started this little twice-a-week paper, which did a fairly good job of covering, and still is, the Okeechobee News. And I was able to graduate quickly to a bureau of the Palm Beach Post in Okeechobee. Back in those days, the Palm Beach Post was a huge paper. It had bureaus all over the place, a huge payroll, and you know, I was really, for a kid reporter, really well compensated for that.
Yeah.
And you know, they really wanted you to, you know, at no expense get the story. So what was happening in Okeechobee was that, you know, there were a lot of people flashing cash in that town at the time, and there was a lot of
Flashing
activity
cash.
going on
Love it.
on the cattle ranches.
Yeah.
On a Saturday night, it would be what was called a drop night,
The Gator Roundup.
where these planes would get unloaded and into, you know, big vehicles and taken over to the coast.
The drop night.
And,
Oh yeah. Oh, I get it. Oh yeah. Like a Miami Vice kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
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 One day there was a round of indictments announced, and it was all kinds of fairly well-known people in Okeechobee, you know, insurance agents, restaurant owners.
wow.
And,
Oh my
I know
gosh.
that some of them got,
Did you cover it?
yeah, I
Wow.
didn't get to the trials. I think a lot of them just pled out, but they still
Yeah.
wound up getting put away for many years. But the real, you know, mind-blowing incident was that one morning I found out that the sheriff was found dead in his bed holding a gun.
Oh my gosh.
And, this was just incredible because a few weeks ago my editors in West Palm were saying, we're starting to hear rumors about your sheriff out there. You know, you got to see what you can find. I couldn't really find anything I could put in the paper.
Right.
You know, when a local tells you, oh, he's delivering drugs.
Right.
That's not enough.
No, it's not.
You know, the thing is,
Yeah.
he probably was, and to this day, I don't think it's really been established whether the
It's been established
whether
he
the
woke up with
sickly
a gun
sheriff,
next to him and
you know,
woke
took
up
his
dead.
life.
That kind of paints a picture for us there, but you know.
But what I do know is that the deputies raced to the house and burned everything in sight. The mattress he was found on, all his papers just went up, and by the time the Florida Department of Law Enforcement got there from Miami or Lauderdale or whatever,
right,
there wasn't. They were just smoking ruins.
Yep.
So I don't
Yep.
know that there was ever any conclusion about his death. I mean, I know there were stories written within the last 10 or 15 years where they were still speculating, but they didn't see much new
Really?
there.
Oh my gosh.
So anyway, there were a few times when somebody would see me at an event and be like, you know, oh, you better be careful, or you know,
Yeah.
something maybe even a little more sinister, like.
Yeah.
It was kind of like. it
I've
was
gotten
kind
that
of-
before. I've gotten the you better be careful before.
Wow.
Oh yeah, I've gotten that. I've gotten hate mail.
They didn't like
Okay.
out of
Well,
town
I get a lot of
reporters
that. Like
much
that.
down there.
I get a lot of that on Facebook and stuff, but I just
Yeah.
block people.
Yeah.
It's
Well, no, I
journalists,
mean
think they
literal
don't-
mail. Like someone literally
really?
mailed
Well, I
a
have gotten
package,
actual like hate.
drew
mail.
pictures with a noose and all of that.
You've gotten that?
Oh, yeah.
Well, recently though, I mean,
Yeah,
I used to get
that
them when I was
was
at the
years
OD, but I don't get
Yeah,
that.
that
Like,
was when the Utica Phoenix.
now I get
um,
like hate mail.
when the print edition was out. That was.
Wow.
Yeah, they took a picture of me from the paper.
Yeah, there's, I
drew a
mean, there's a
noose
lot of
around
hate.
it.
I was thinking like it's not that there's less hate now.
Put,
it's just that
put
the hate
horns
is
on
more
my
social
head.
media.
Oh god.
But the
Like
big,
that.
the
It's
big
really
event in
cool to know you
Okeechobee,
really
by the
care.
way, was called the Speckled Perch Festival.
Hmm.
That was
Was that a fish or a bird?
it is a fish. It's a fish found in Lake Okeechobee. People
Now
go
was
there.
that fancy there? That's Palm Beach, right? Like,
Oh no, it was the
Speckled
exact
perch.
opposite.
oh, so this
You
wasn't
think-
with the Dear Susie column. I don't know.
No, but, you
she
know, the-
wasn't at that one.
But
So
the Palm Beach Post had won the Pulitzer for a year or two prior. There was all kinds of scandal in Palm Beach and like with local government taking bribes and stuff, and so you know it was a serious, really great
How do you
newspaper
feel
that
when
now
you're
barely
writing
exists anymore.
about scandal, like how do you like to write about that? How does it make you feel like when you're writing about that? Like as a journalist, when you're writing a story or covering a story, if you had a choice, what kind of stories would you like to do?
I like stories more that set the scene and make people aware that you know this is what it's really like in this situation.
What are some way where you were there that you wrote that you think helped set the scene of what it was like? And how did you write them, especially for you coming from Pennsylvania, like someone
Yeah.
who wasn't a Florida native? How did you do that through your work?
I did a story. I was teamed up with a reporter that, you know, she was really good at getting the story. You know, I'd been there a while, and we did a piece. It was like a huge front page, just went on forever about the whole scene in Okeechobee surrounding the sheriff's
corruption kind of
death
thing.
and
Yeah.
the indictments and everything, and it was kind of risky. The locals hated it because. You know, the headline wasn't anything terrible. It was like, you know, sheriff's suicide, you know,
Right.
spurs the rumors in Okeechobee, but, you know, people didn't want anything like that in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
newspaper. So, you know, you don't like, you know, you don't
seems-
exactly.
It didn't
win.
make you popular.
Yeah,
for
it doesn't
doing
make
that.
you popular.
But
You
it's
really,
still what you got to do.
you really should do a job like that for a year or two, which I did, and then get out, to be honest.
Why is that?
You're just, after a while, people just don't talk to you. Once you've
Really?
had a couple, you
Yeah.
know, it's hard to get quotes from people.
Being a
and
reporter at all, or being like a crime reporter?
being more, you know, for a paper that did the controversial stuff.
news.
I mean, I probably could have stayed at the Okeechobee News forever, and people wouldn't have been mad at me because they
Yeah,
wouldn't do
yeah.
that kind of, you know, they just played it it was
Right.
pretty bland. But like when you're going out doing features and stuff like this,
Oh, yeah.
no matter what I wrote, they always said I made the town look bad because
Right,
you
I was
know,
gonna say people are willing to share all the dirt as long as you don't put their name.
Yeah,
in there.
it's like
They
you
will.
can
They'll
get
tell
a
you
lot.
everything.
Yeah,
But
they
the-
will.
You
Oh
know,
my gosh.
This paper
Oh,
didn't like
man.
the unnamed
I know
source.
so much about who like drinks too much and
Oh,
DWIs. People
Utica?
message me all the time about DWIs. It's like I've never written about DWI in my life, and I doubt I ever will. I don't like that kind of stuff. So
There
it's
was a time,
Well,
a
yeah,
couple
but-
administrations ago, where maybe at least 4 people were wearing a wire down at City Hall.
Oh my gosh! Seriously?
That was
Wow.
during.
Well,
the-
here's a
yeah.
great example. There was a local insurance agent, and he was kind
Local to
of
here at Palm Beach.
in Palm Beach,
Oh,
in
okay.
Okeechobee.
I was gonna try to guess.
And he had friends in the Okeechobee News, and I guess there was some incident in a fast food restaurant, if I recall, where he didn't get his order done, or someone said something smart to him in line, and he punched the guy.
Wow.
And the sheriff's department hid that
covered it up.
information, and the local, the Okeechobee News didn't cover it because he was a big sponsor.
Yeah.
So I did the story, and then the Okeechobee News had to do a follow-up, but they goofed up the details. So he was actually madder at them than he was at me. But he paid me a visit one morning at the paper and brought this pit bull that looked like it was about to, could take your arm off, and he made a lot of sort of vague statements
Florida
about.
pit bulls are more intimidating
It was
than
just
other
kind
pit
of
bulls.
like, it was very uncomfortable, where I think he was
Yeah.
trying to tell me, you better watch your back, although he didn't quite say
what
that.
did you say to him?
I don't know, there's, it's a long
He
time
said,
ago.
okay.
but-
He said, I know. Hey, he
What
said,
did
whatever you
actually-
say,
What do you do in that
I'll do
situation?
it. All right, buddy. Yeah.
Like, what do you do in that situation? Like, what should you do?
In that situation, I think you have to.
You're like, oh.
You gotta fight back. What are you talking
Well,
about?
really, I mean, but is
He
it,
was not-
should you, or should you just like
When
be
you
like,
get
oh, all right,
threatened.
just kind of like blow it off? I mean, really.
I sent the story in quickly when I knew that I could get the information, and it was partly
Yeah.
because they made such a big deal about it. It was like this big story that went all auditions.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
John, when somebody comes at you with a big pit bull, just call me, all right? just call.
But anyway, we probably need to get to IBX.
So what happened after that? Yes. So you went to locally. You were
There
at
was kind of an
WIBX.
interim where I went back to Pennsylvania for a while. I'd had enough of Florida. I worked at a small paper near Gettysburg, and then I got the offer to come to WIBX. And at the time, WIBX, the AM station probably had somewhere in the vicinity of 10 to 15 people.
Yeah.
The
In-
newsroom
on the news staff.
the news staff was probably close to that, and then there were a couple of local talk show hosts and
Yeah.
people in other aspects. But we actually had a full-time farm director.
No, what
when
time
I-
period was this? The 90s?
This was late. This was 87, I
Oh,
think.
okay.
Yeah, and they actually had a guy that did nothing but a farm show full time from like 5 to 6 a.m.
Really?
And then they had there were, if you count the sports guys, there were probably 8 or 9 people with the news operation.
Yeah.
So we actually went out
So
and
the whole like news
yeah,
staff back then.
it was almost round the clock news.
Loretta was with them
Yeah.
then, right?
Because
Was
that
Loretta?
was right after she had been there
Yeah.
prior to me. I don't think I took her job, but there was somebody else. at
Yeah,
that
the
time.
smooth, smoky boy. Loretta.
Wasn't Lou Santa Approach from there too?
Yeah, I had
Johnson.
worked with him
God
toward the
bless you,
end,
Loretta.
Yeah.
and so
So what did you do there at WIBX?
So I started out, doing like afternoon news, covering the Common Council, the Utica School Board, the county legislature, and just any number of local press conferences.
Yeah.
And
Probably something that was kind of like routine.
Yeah,
At
so it
first,
was
like
kind of
when you start.
kind of a routine to it, and eventually I got to fill in on some talk shows when the hosts were gone, and
What did they have back then for talk shows? Like now it's just the Keeler show, I think. And
Yeah.
That's pretty much it, right?
when I started, there was like 6 hours a day of local talk.
Yeah, there was like more local programming.
In fact,
back then.
It was a lot more.
there was an overnight talk host for a very brief period when I was there, and then and
Before
there was
Art Bell came along.
yeah, and there was a sports show every night, which was a very good sports show. Those guys have gone on. One of the guys is doing the Philadelphia Phillies now.
Really?
and,
Who's
Wow.
that?
and hockey, his name was Jim Jackson.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then and Danny Klinkscale went out to Kansas City. And,
Oh yeah,
Oh, I recognize
Chris.
that.
and,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
He's got- yeah,
Bruce
he's
Markinson's at the Baseball Hall of
Yeah.
Fame now.
Yeah.
So that was a great sports department. No sports show now. There hasn't been for years.
They had the Sports Stars radio network for a while with the Clear Channel.
And it narrowed down a little bit
Remember,
through the years to
yeah.
just, there was like a morning hour talk show, and that's what I would fill in sometimes when,
As the host.
yeah.
Shout out to Fred Miller from the Sports Stars radio network.
I did like a 10
So
or
you can-
15 minute segment every day though, where I'd interview someone, and
Okay.
I would often have someone like the governor or a senator if they were coming to town, or some
So
author.
they wouldn't be live then.
I had, it was live,
Oh, it
yeah,
was live.
often,
Oh,
yeah.
okay,
I
okay.
I had RFK Jr. on one time.
Oh wow!
Oh my
Good.
God.
That was back when he was.
Now was he
His
normal
stock
then,
was
or
shooting
he
crazy.
was,
or
yeah, and
His
his
stock
voice
was
was
high then.
normal too.
Any signs of craziness popping through or brainworm
No,
symptoms?
I
or
bet that
nothing at
was
all?
probably
That was
about-
before the bear,
Did he
right?
say
That was
anything
early
bizarre
90s.
about vaccines
Yeah.
or any make any unusual statements in the interview?
Back then, he was a liberal environmentalist. So
Right.
so
Hard
he
to
has
imagine.
changed.
That was before
Hard
the
to
bear.
imagine.
Yeah.
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 Before the brain,
Well-
those brainworms, they can
Well-
change their personality. You know.
I'm telling you, you go through some trauma in life, right? And
Well, brainworms. That's a
people have different ways of healing. You know, it affects you
Jeez.
differently.
Yeah.
RFK is something else, man.
I would have to think, I'm not sure what age he was, but I would have to think your father getting assassinated would profoundly
Affect
change you.
Yeah, it would.
Your life would never be the same
Not
again.
that I forgive him, but I suppose
Yeah.
that has something to do with that.
Yeah, it's got a lot to do with, you know.
So, anyways, what did you do? So, what did you guys ever like do feature stories? Like, you would go out and do stories like, at the or IBX would, like with a tape recorder, right?
Yeah,
So,
we
what
always,
was that like back
we
then?
had like a news van and everything, yeah, I mean.
I didn't realize it was like a news van.
We actually, it was in the early days, but we actually had like a phone in the van that we could phone in from the scenes.
Oh, like that'd be a big deal back then.
If there was a big fire.
Like back in the day when they used to call in,
They were the
phones
size
would be
of bricks,
ringing.
you know.
They have five different phones. Right? What's going on? What do you got? What do you got? What do you got?
Sound of typewriters in the background.
Like the Bowery Boys.
So, like, what was that process like?
I love it.
Going out to get a story.
Well, you go out with your tape recorder, and you know you're just trying to you're trying to boil down a subject in a minute or two.
Right, right.
For,
They make
you know,
it simple
Which
and
is hard.
digestible.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. That's why it's so hard.
some
And you gotta do it
subjects
quickly.
are so complex that they're kind of hard to.
Right.
Like let's say something like windmills today. It's pretty hard to sum that argument up in a minute and a half. You know,
Yeah.
you just have to, find a way to boil it down. What we
Right.
would do is we did 3 versions and 3 separate cuts. You know, actualities on every story, just to vary the content a
Really?
little
So,
bit.
what would it be, other than content, would it be mostly length, or would it be tone, or like, what would be the difference?
I kind of let the person or people involved, mostly do the talking.
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
explaining, their side of the story and.
So, like, how long the stories were then? So, like, when you had a story, like, say, like, you're at WIBX with a fully functioning, like, news staff. So, like, you go out and cover a story, you produce a story. Like, you have, say, what would be a long length for a story for you? Like, for a feature story back in the 80s or 90s?
Like a long time
Yeah.
frame for it. Really 2 minutes tops. I
So
mean,
you have a 2-minute version of the story. So like in the beginning, when it's like a news story, would they usually use like the whole 2 minutes, and then like as the news day progresses, like maybe cut down to a smaller version that would come like later in the hour? Is that what the difference would be, or?
I think it more would just get bumped.
Oh, I see.
Right, I'm about to
Something-
bump this story
if
because this is
something
boring you
bigger
to death.
came up, yeah.
Jesus
Well, no,
Christ.
I'm just
Are you kidding me?
Well, tell me just about WIBX.
Jesus, no, stop.
Well,
No,
that's been
no,
fun, though.
don't tell
like,
me.
what was it
I
like,
don't
you
want to
So,
know.
yeah.
I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Please don't tell me.
Well,
I don't want to know.
How did you make stories,
You
Dave?
put me to sleep, man.
No, how do you make
Ah!
stories though? Like that's interesting.
No, it's
How do you
really,
do it?
a journalist is driven,
Yeah,
right?
right.
We don't make stories, we follow them.
No, but you have to figure out
The
what the
journalists
story
follow
is.
stories.
You gotta
We
communicate.
don't make
the story.
stories.
No, but we gotta
The
figure
news
out what the story
attracts
is.
us as
No,
a
but like
journalist.
before ChatGPT,
No,
how did you boil it down? Because like
I
a lot-
never use ChatGPT.
Well, I mean, I'm very modern, so I use modern stuff. But I think that it's
Yeah.
important. But
I've
people,
never used it.
beforehand, it's interesting to think about, like, how do you look at a big complex thing and boil it down? I mean, that's hard.
That's something that, as a journalist, I think that's always been our job.
Well, I
Our
know,
job is
I
to
know.
be a witness for the people.
Right. But
And
it's
to
hard
make
to
it,
do. That's
make
what
it
I'm
to
saying.
simplify a complicated subject.
Exactly.
You
Yeah,
have,
that's what
you
we
have
do.
a fine line to tread. You don't want to bore the listener, but you also don't want to aggravate the people you're doing the story about, and leave anything
Right.
out. You have
Oversimplify.
or,
Oh,
you know,
man.
or turn out being too biased toward
Right.
one side or the other.
You know how many times I've written the story and had people come back and rail at me over what I wrote?
No
Oh
one's
yeah.
ever
Why
done
didn't
that.
you say this? But why didn't you mention
Nobody's
that?
ever done that.
You know?
At
That
WIBX,
was
there
all
were
the time.
two perennial candidates. I really don't want to mention them. I don't want
Oh, it's sick,
harassment.
guys.
But they would show up. They would show up in person and rant and rave. Sometimes
Oh, right.
it was unfair. Yeah.
It's probably
But guys,
trying to
I hate to
there's one
interrupt
trying
you
to get
guys.
me
I hate to
fired
interrupt
from the
anybody.
side.
But we're
Probably
up
her.
against it. This is the end of the show. Baby Wayne is up now at 6 o'clock. And man, this has been a good hour. It's been a lot of
So
fun.
for those
Hopefully
people
we
who
can do it
For
again.
those people who still say bring them on
No.
camera, where can people go
Baby
in the
Wayne?
near future?
I'll get this up. I'll try to get this up by Friday
Alright.
at uticavs.net/media Monday, and we can do this again. We'll get more.
All right, awesome. So yeah, have a good evening, everybody.
Have a good night.
Yeah.
All right.
Take care, guys.
Broadcasting from Big B Studios, your station for classic hip hop, R&B, and much, much more. You are listening to WUSP 1550 AM, W238CA, 95.5 FM, Utica, New York. The Heat.
It adds a whole.
Oh, yeah, the whole new
emotional
dynamic.
aspect to it.
Yeah, the whole dynamic, man. Believe me, when I get home and look, by the time